All right, so here we are, day 17 of the Men in Recovery series. This has been a real treat to be able to do this, and my next guest is really one of the great treats of this project for me. Jack Bainon is a gentleman that I have actually never met face to face, but that I have spent a lot of time connecting with. We met through Facebook. We continue to stay connected through Facebook. He was one of the men I interviewed for my last book, A Man's Way Through Relationships. He models an incredible connection to his spirituality, his recovery, and his family. And so, Jack, I really want to welcome you to this series, and thank you again for being a guest. And Jack, welcome.
Oh, good. Yep. Hello, my name is Jack Oquist. I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad to be here doing this with Dan. My greatest gift in recovery has been relationship. Looking at all of them in my sobriety. And, in the beginning of my sobriety, I hated myself. That was one of the most hardest things that I could do, is look in the mirror and say, "I love you, Jack." And I remember the old timers saying, you look in the mirror and someday you'll be able to say, "I love you." And, with all the work, everything that I've done, counseling, different forms of counseling, and, treatment centers and sweat lodges, and all of my sobriety. I've been able to look at myself now and look at myself and really appreciate who I see and what I'm doing with my life in sobriety. I think that was the first part of my relationship was with me. Second part of my relationship, I guess should have been with God. My relationship with Him, and how hard of a time that I had with Him. My relationship with God was one of rage and hate. Because of all of the people that I've lost in my life. I lost a son in 1988 and 5 others in a house fire. And I blamed God and myself for losing my son. And, that was it was a pretty hard, traumatic thing for me to look at when I sobered up. And then when I finally got around, like a 35-year-old guy, a sober guy, Eric Barton, he was sober 35 years, and I asked him, what is it like what is your higher power like? And I remember him taking a while to answer me, but finally he said, your higher power is the one that I like the most. And I said, what's that? And he said, the way that you look at your First Nations, the Mother Earth and Father Sky, and the trees, the bark, everything that housed you, your transportation, the elevator, all of those things that were part of my culture that I didn't really know about because I was drinking, and then he told me, he said, for him, 35 years sober, he said he tried all of that in church and in yoga and meditation. He said he tried to get closer to God, but he said he always loved what we have the most. And it's taken me a while, but I looked at it, and I look at my relationship with my higher power, and it turned from one that was used to be in AA in a meeting. It was a switch, a regular switch. You can turn it on or off, and then after a while, it became it evolved. The more I worked on myself in the program, and the more work that I did on myself with counseling, the better it got. But it hurt going through that relationship. It really hurt. I can remember times when I was so wanting to give up. Like not growing up without a father figure in your life. I remember talking with you about this before. That I was my father figure. So my father, my 2 younger brothers, I was that father figure. And right from the age of 8, 10 years old, I was that father figure. My father sitting in front of me like a little kid, and and I'm asking him, what's wrong with this situation? And he said, what? And I said, this situation here with me and you, you're the son, I'm the father, and I want it switched around. But he didn't know how because of the trauma that he went through. And I can remember the one thing that really I wanted in my life in sobriety was looking at my relationship with my family. My father I loved so much, my mother I loved so much, but I wanted something better for, the kids that I have left. And that's how it started out, it wasn't perfect. We made a lot of mistakes in our sobriety, but we walked through it all, staying sober. Me and my wife, January will be 25 years for us, and for that, it's like I don't give it us any of the glory. It is it's, the Creator that helped us walk through, and then all of the other people like you, Dan, helping with meeting up on Facebook and looking at that 12 step. That really hurt. I mean, it hurt. Like when I looked at your book, I remember how much it hurt, like going through it, because in the other 12 step program, looking at those ones, yours had more trauma for me to walk through, and I kept thinking, back then, I said, I thought that I did all of this work on myself, but then when I read your book, it was like opening another onion peel, just opening up another one, and then finally, a man's way through the relationships, the relationships, reading that, and finding out how much that I was missing, like when I got sober, I remember at an AA meeting saying, and I was up there crying, my first time able to speak at a meeting, 6-7 months sober, and I remember crying, and I remember saying, what's it like to be able to make a normal human decision that doesn't hurt you? And I was crying, and I was looking at everybody, and I was saying, I don't know. I said, everything I do seems to be where I'm hurting, either myself or my family. That one little guy named Ross, he come up to me and looked at me, and he said, put his arms on my shoulders, and he said, Jack, he said, you keep doing what you're doing. You keep coming to these meetings, keep talking to your sponsor, keep working on your stuff, your 12 steps, counseling, whatever you're doing, because I can see the change in you. And then it started to work. I remember when I first sobered up, going to those Friday night meetings, that little guy Ross, trying to walk by him, and he'd shake my hand, and he'd look at me in the eye, and he'd put his hands on my shoulders, and he'd say, Jack, I love you. And then he'd hug me, and I didn't like being hugged. 3 months later, I finally asked him, why do you hug people? I don't like being hugged. And he looked at me and put his arms on my shoulders again, and Jack, everybody who comes into these meetings hates themselves. So I'm going to tell you, I love you, and until you love yourself. I had to run outside that time and cry. All those incidents, in times, where they helped me look at myself, and then in turn they helped me look at, my relationship with my higher power, and then my wife, my kids, Now we have 8 grandkids, and they never seen us drunk. They haven't seen that, and it's like for them, the relationship that I have with them is one where I'm their grandfather, and my son. It's one where they are my son. I'm not their son. I think that for me, in all of my life growing up and into sobriety, was one of the most painful parts for me, was my relationship with my father. I think I was about 10 years sober when he passed away in sobriety. And I can remember, going up to that old folks home and talking to those people up there, and looking at pictures. And then the lady told me, she said, um, your dad started telling me about what you said to him. And I said, oh, really? And then she said, yeah. She said, the first time you went up to him, you were trying to ask him advice on what you should do, with your kids or your wife, trouble, arguments. And, I remember those times. I remember my dad couldn't say anything, but he said it to her.
Mm.
He looked at him, and she said, why are you telling me things? Why don't you tell your son? And my dad told me, I can't talk to my son. I can't talk to my kids the way that I can talk to you.
Mm.
That's a really sad part.
Mm.
And I found after that, about that after he passed away. And that was one of the most painful things for me to look at, was that he couldn't communicate in the right way as a father to his son. And then see that woman, she said, maybe I should stop, because I was crying. And I told her, I said, well, no, don't, please don't. I said, it's better that I know this information secondhand rather than not at all.
Mm.
I realized, that what I was doing with my dad, in Friday, it started to work. He hated he hated having people say he loved them. My mom and my grandmother the same way. I remember going up to my grandmother and my mom and them, getting down on my knees and holding their hands, different times and saying, I love you. You're my grandmother. You're my mother. I'm going to be telling you I love you for the rest of my life. The same thing with my dad. I said the same thing. I used my kids on my dad, where every time they seen them, I told them, I said, you go up and hug your grandpa. That was how, inside of a year, I remember every time I go up to old folks home, my dad seen the kids, so he would jump up, and he would have his arms out. And that for me was one of the big difference in the relationship. The change. My father being able to hug him, being able to walk up to him, and him having his arms out without me having to, hug him without him wanting it. And I remember my father, he saying, when did that change? I said, when did what change? And I remember I didn't like you guys hugging. And, to come from that trauma, of where my dad came from, we never talk about it, what happened to him. And then look at it, for me, my dad's life is still a mystery. I'm still learning about his side of the family. For me, like looking at my life and being able to stand up, be a normal human being, I think that's the most awesome thing about all of my sobriety. Like when I look at it, like all of the things that I've done in sobriety, I remember how I used to be. When I drank, I remember how I was when I was a kid. And being able to work on all of those things, that the trauma part about what's me, work on the ones that didn't work in my life, and then allowing the ones that helped me stay alive. Being a first aid attendant for 34 years, I used to think that something like that was something that I didn't want. Being a workaholic, looking at that in my life, and all of the things about my relationship, looking at all of my life, with my wife, my beautiful wife, the things we've gone through. 11 years drinking, and then the rest of it in sobriety, Now it's like, we can walk down the street, hold hands yet, you know, 34 or 35 years together, and to be able to have that and still have, to be a husband and wife. Because I remember how scared I was when I first sobered up and looked at a lot of the people around me in AA and treatment centers and hearing that, families, husbands and wives didn't last very long after they sobered up. I remember I was terrified of that. But, it worked out. It's like realizing, that this is a spiritual program, for us. It's not perfection. We make mistakes. We get up, and even with me, with God, with myself, with my kids, with my wife, I make mistakes. But I keep getting up, I look at my life, like from that time, 1988 to 1992, that was the time when I really walked that road of misery, where I wanted to die. Because my son, he passed away in 1988, my other five, and all of that time, I do remember wanting to die. But, the Creator, I remember coming out of a blackout, I went out in the speedboat and I wanted to die, and I was gonna. But I woke up out of that blackout, and I was coming back into Prince Rupert Harbor there, and I was crying, and I was looking up, and I was asking, why didn't I die? But, I look at it now, it's like my life, I have something that I can pass on. And it's all those sponsors, that you, the stuff that I've learned from you, and all of that work, AA, in the treatment center, it helped me understand who I am. It helped me realize, that I have to try to be that best example I can. My sponsor used to always tell me, he used to always say, you have to be, he said, you might be the only big book a person sees out there. You might not have a big book, but if you're out there, you might be that only big book a person sees. I don't know how many times he told me to shut up and listen. I did. There were times when I didn't listen.
Those are also such wonderful stories and the ways that you recount your journey. I love that story about Ross. And how much I think about how we change as men in our recovery. And just think about that. He's a man who hugs other men who don't want to be hugged. And then he tells them, I'm going to love you until you can love yourself. That's the gift of the recovery community for so many men, is it gives us permission to be that kind of man. And, you with your wife, and you're just so open about the hard work that you and your wife have done, and the hard work that your kids and you have done. And, you are experiencing the benefits of that. And that's what this month is all about, is it's about celebrating recovery. It's about celebrating the lives that we've gotten as a gift, because it really is a second chance. And in many ways, most of us are living on borrowed time. We got this extra inning to play. And, I can't thank you enough for being a part of this, for sharing this journey with me. And as I say with all of these conversations, these interviews, I always would like my guests to have the last word. So with that, Jack Okwas Bainan, please take us home.
All right, thank you again. It's been really good. All of the stuff that I've learned from you. That guy Ross, I can really remember how I felt inside when he would hug me. And the look. all of my life, I used to be used to looking down, not at other people in the eyes. Eh? And, there were times, when I was looking down and he would grab my face, lift it up. And he said, look at me in the eyes. And he would just say, I love you. And I guess maybe inside of a year after that, being able to return it and say, I love you, Ross. And I really thank you. All the stuff that you did for me.
Mm.
And, just for something like that, that was priceless,
Yeah.
for him. So I thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Happy Recovery Month.
Yeah. Yeah. You too.